Alright, this is for AP Government, Monday, March the 30th. Today we'll be talking about letters from Birmingham Jail. Before I do that, I just want to kind of quickly update on some things. So this week we will finish up our Civil Rights and Civil Liberties unit with some sort of assessment. I'm still kind of looking at that by the end of the week. The next week is spring break. And then after that, we're going to have about 3 weeks of review. And how that's exactly going to look is going to depend on the AP Board's update this Friday, April 3rd. There's a questionnaire on Google Classroom about whether or not you would want online reviews, like through either YouTube Live or Zoom or something like that. Obviously, I don't know exactly what the test is going to be other than 2 FRQ questions. I don't know what type of FRQ questions they're going to be. There's a pretty good consensus. The SCOTUS question is going to be one of the 2. So I'm waiting until Friday until I can start to put a lot of that plan together. But that's kind of how we are looking after spring break. We're going to have 3 weeks of review, but we'll see when the test dates are. There's no guarantee that May 4th, which is our original test date, that's still going to be the test date or not. There's actually going to be 2 test dates. So we'll find out more on Friday, and then once I know that on Friday, I can start to get our review for the AP exam figured out. All right, so moving on to the letter from the Birmingham Jail. This is the last of our foundational documents. There's 9 of them. We covered the rest of them in the first semester. The unfortunate thing about the way this class is structured is you have all your foundational documents in one unit, basically, and all your SCOTUS cases for the most part in another unit. So that's kind of the unfortunate part about it. But this is the last of our foundational documents. So just kind of background on the document. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested in Birmingham, Alabama for parading without a permit. So they were protesting segregation inside the city of Birmingham. And so he didn't have a permit from the government to protest, and so that's why he was arrested. While he's in jail, I believe he's in jail for 12 days, he writes a letter that it's in response to the Southern Christian Leadership Council, but it's also meant, for the public, and it kind of states why his nonviolent interventionism to, the civil rights movement is needed, and why it's important. So, if I was going to compare this to any document in AP Gov, I guess I'd compare this to the Declaration of Independence. It's very similar in the sense that it's listing out grievances, it's listing why we have these rights, and list what we should do about it in order to get these rights. So, Martin Luther King Jr. starts out with a list of grievances faced by his community in Birmingham. Talks about segregation, talks about mistreatment in courts. Of course, there's the bombings in Birmingham. It was called Birmingham during the civil rights movement. And so he's saying, look, here is the clear acts of injustice against, a certain group of people. This is why we have to act. We're not just acting because. These are the clear reasons that are drawing us to act in this movement. So, like I said, Martin Luther King Jr. is speaking to the Southern Christian Leadership Council, and he's basically saying, why do we have to act? Okay, and he's, a good quote that comes from this, and I stole a lot of this from a fellow teacher, so sorry if they see this, but the idea that freedom is never voluntarily given by an oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And I think that's a really good quote, and you can relate that to the Declaration of Independence, right? Britain was never going to just, lean up, or kind of pump the brakes on its oppression on the colonists if they hadn't started to boycott, if they also didn't take arms against Great Britain. I don't think the colonists would have ever got those rights, or at least not in an orderly fashion. And so Martin Luther King Jr. is kind of making the same point right here. We're not going to get rights if we just kind of sit here and and just kind of, speak our grievances, or even don't, act on those. And so he says we must do it in order for the rest of the world to see what's going on and for change to come. So he calls for civil disobedience, and of course this is hopefully something that you've heard of before. But basically he's saying, look, obviously he's smart enough to know that you can't fight, the southern governments with arms. That's obviously not going to make your movement sympathetic. So he takes nonviolent interaction, things like sit-ins, right, or marches down the street where they're peaceful. They're not straight up breaking laws. They're making this nonviolent action to bring attention and the hope for more people to join in, and then eventually to establish civil rights for everyone. And he talks about, in this quote down right here, there's two types of laws that are just and laws that are unjust. And basically says one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And that's very similar if you go back to the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, when he talks about it's the duty of an individual to rise up against a tyrannical government, one that's not acknowledging, these inherent, natural rights that we kind of talked about. And again, like he said, Martin Luther King Jr., instead of him talking about natural rights like life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, he says basically all people have the right to be treated the same. And he basically says any law that downgrades human personality is unjust and must not be followed. So he says, it's up to an individual to peacefully disobey unjust laws. That way attention is called to it, and eventually society as a whole can change these laws and make them more just. And then he kind of really makes this idea of, the fact that all people are created equal, again, referring to the Declaration of Independence. He says, anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. So he's like, look, we are people that live inside the United States. We have the right to have these rights and laws attributed to us equally, just like anyone else. And so he also kind of makes the idea that before Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, we were here. What he means by we, his ancestors or the former slaves, they were here. They were people that when Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal, we are included in that phrase, all men are created equal. And because all men are created equal, we can't have these laws that are forcing people to be desegregated and forcing people to be treated differently on the basis of their skin. And so he kind of calls for this 4-step process to lead to change. So the first thing is you have to have this nonviolent direct action. Okay, that means you're having your sit-ins, you're having something that draws a community's attention to it, right? If you are really upset about some sort of law, you have to do something to get the city's attention or to get the community's attention, right? You can't just sit at home and cross your arms and be upset, because then, nobody else is going to know and attention's not going to be drawn to your cause. Second thing is there has to be this tension that's created. What that means is there has to be, these people that are being oppressed versus I guess you want to call it the oppressors. In this instance, it was the Southern businesses and political leaders that was forcing segregation on the African American community. Then you have to negotiate. So then the civil rights leaders and the Southern leaders are going to have to come together in an effort to seek policy change and to end segregation. And then eventually at the end, you're going to have a policy change that advances civil rights. All right, so that brings us to the end of me talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and the letter from the Birmingham Jail. Like I said, I think it's a good parallel between the Declaration of Independence and then what's happening, especially in the South in the 1960s. So that brings us to an end to this. Tuesday, we'll officially finish up the unit, and then we'll kind of look at an assessment towards the end of the week. hope everyone's safe. Hope everyone's staying healthy, and let me know if you have any questions.